The morning air in downtown Chicago carried that early chill, the kind that bites at your fingertips and creeps under your coat no matter how tight it's wrapped. Sidewalks buzzed with people in tailored suits, rushing lattes and loud phone calls. Among them, a man sat still. He was slouched near the corner of 6th and Pearl, back against the brick of an old coffee shop. His beard was unkempt, and his coat 2 sizes too big. His shoes were the most noticeable of all. One was duct-taped at the toe. The other had mismatched laces, one neon green, the other frayed yarn. He didn't ask for money, didn't hold a sign. He just stared straight ahead, like he was waiting for something, or someone. Across the street, 17-year-old Madison West was busy scrolling TikTok, her caramel macchiato in one hand, the other tugging at her Burberry scarf. Her laugh cut through the crowd as she bumped shoulders with her best friend Zoe. "Oh my God, look at his shoes." Madison pointed toward the homeless man with a mocking laugh. "He looks like he got dressed in a dumpster." Zoe giggled nervously. "Madison, I mean, come on." Madison rolled her eyes. "That's a whole look. Homeless chic. Maybe it'll trend next season." The man didn't flinch, didn't even glance her way, and somehow that bothered Madison more than if he had yelled at her. She flipped her hair, shot a boomerang of her drink for her story, and walked off, leaving the man in the duct-taped shoes behind like a bad punchline. What Madison didn't know was that her laughter, so casual and cold, had been overheard, not by the man, but by someone sitting on a bench just a few feet away. A woman with silver hair and sharp eyes. She said nothing, but she watched. That evening, Madison sprawled on the living room couch, half watching TV, half scrolling her phone. Her dad was in the kitchen, humming as he cooked. Madison barely registered the voice from the screen. And now for our special segment tonight, the man who vanished. A decorated veteran, once thought to be dead, has resurfaced, but not where anyone expected. Something about that sentence pulled Madison's eyes from her screen. The news anchor continued. John Robert J.R. Callahan, a name forgotten by most, was once the youngest Marine to earn the Silver Star for bravery. But after a family tragedy and a mysterious disappearance nearly 15 years ago, he became a ghost. A photo popped up. Madison's mouth dropped. It was him, the man with the duct-taped shoes, the one she mocked that morning. He was now on every screen in America. The camera cut to a clip, a shaky phone video of JR in his coat, being approached by a woman in a suit. "Mr. Callahan," she said, "the president would like to meet you personally." He didn't respond, just nodded slowly. Madison froze. She stared at the screen, the memory of her laughter ringing in her ears. "He looks like he got dressed in a dumpster." She felt a pit form in her stomach. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached to turn the volume up. The news anchor continued. According to records, J.R. Callahan disappeared in 2010 after the death of his wife and son. It's believed he suffered from undiagnosed PTSD and chose a life of anonymity. But the truth may be far more complex. Madison's dad walked in, drying his hands. "You watching this? That man's a legend. Callahan took a bullet to save his entire squad." Madison said nothing. Her face was pale. Her father leaned in. "Wait a second. Wasn't he the guy you?" She cut him off. "I didn't know." But even as she said it, she knew that wasn't the point. The next morning, she walked past that same coffee shop corner, her pace slower this time, but the man was gone. No coat, no shoes, no trace, only a folded newspaper left where he'd sat. The headline? "Decorated veteran reunites with sister, refuses to speak publicly, for now." Madison stared at the picture below it. JR, wearing the same coat, standing beside the silver-haired woman from the bench. Zoe met her a few blocks down. "You good? You're like haunted." Madison didn't answer, her voice barely a whisper. "He was a hero." Zoe frowned. "Who?" "The man I laughed at." Madison swallowed. "He saved lives. He was in pain. And I made fun of his shoes." They stood there in silence. Then, from behind them, a voice, soft but clear. I never minded the shoes. It's people's eyes that hurt the most. They turned, but no one was there. Just the wind, just traffic, just a city moving on. Or so it seemed, because across the street, in the reflection of a dark SUV window, she could have sworn she saw him, J.R. Callahan, standing, watching, and then disappearing behind the door. The reflection was gone as fast as it had appeared. But Madison knew what she saw. It was him. Same coat, same steady posture, same silent eyes that had looked through her like glass only a day before. Except now, there was something else behind them, something knowing. Zoe waved a hand in front of her friend's face. Hello? Earth to Maddie. Madison didn't respond. She just stared at the SUV, lips parted, thoughts racing. That was him, she finally said. J.R. Callahan. I saw him. Zoe followed her gaze. The homeless guy? No. The veteran. The one on the news. Zoe paused, unsure. You're sure it was him? Madison didn't answer. Instead, she crossed the street. For the rest of the day, Madison couldn't focus. Not at school. Not on her phone. Not even when her favorite influencer went live. Her thoughts were tethered to the man in the duct-taped shoes and to her own guilt. Her father tried talking to her over dinner. You okay, Mads? You've barely touched your pasta. She poked at it half-heartedly. Dad, can I ask you something? Sure, baby. Have you ever judged someone and then realized you were completely wrong? He looked up from his plate, eyebrows lifted. Every human being does that, whether we admit it or not. The difference is whether you learn from it or keep pretending you were right. Madison nodded slowly. His words echoed deep inside her. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking of his shoes, the ones she laughed at. But now, they weren't just duct-taped. They were a symbol of walking through fire, of surviving. The next morning, Madison skipped her first period. She took the same train downtown, stood at the same corner near the coffee shop, and waited, and waited, and waited. Hours passed. She bought a hot chocolate for the first homeless woman she met. She helped an old man find a bus stop. It didn't make her feel better. Not really, but maybe it was a start. Then, as the sun dipped low, she saw someone familiar. Not JR, but the woman from the bench, the silver-haired woman who had watched it all that day. She was back, sitting in the same spot, book in hand, calm. Madison approached slowly. Excuse me, were you here 2 days ago? The woman looked up. Her eyes were sharp, like they could read your soul. I'm here most days. Why do you ask? I saw you watching me. I laughed at someone, at his shoes, and I think you knew something I didn't. A long pause. Then the woman smiled, thinly. I remember you, she said. You were cruel. Madison's breath caught. But, the woman added, you're here now. That counts for something. Madison lowered her head. Do you know where he is? The woman closed her book and stood. Why do you want to find him? I need to apologize. I need to understand. The woman studied her a moment longer, then reached into her coat pocket and handed Madison a folded paper. It was a napkin, scribbled with a name and an address. The Ark, room 212. What's this? Madison asked. The woman only said, he doesn't open his door for just anyone. Then she turned and walked away. The Ark was a transitional housing shelter, a place where veterans and displaced people could find a bed and a warm meal. Madison had heard of it before, but never stepped foot inside. That afternoon, she stood outside its brick building, heart pounding, paper in hand. Inside, the lobby was dim and quiet. A volunteer greeted her with a smile. Looking for someone? J.R. Callahan. Room 212, Madison replied. The volunteer blinked. You know J.R.? Madison hesitated. Not really, but I think he's expecting me. The volunteer gave a wary nod. Second floor, last room on the left. Don't be surprised if he doesn't answer. He's particular. Madison climbed the narrow staircase, her breath shallow. Each step felt heavier than the last. Finally, she reached the door. Room 212. She raised her hand. Knocked. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. Mr. Callahan, it's Madison. From the other day. I was the one who laughed. Still no reply. I didn't know who you were. I didn't see you. And now I can't stop thinking about it. About you. Pause. Please. Just give me 2 minutes. Silence. Then slowly, the door creaked open an inch. A single eye appeared through the gap. And for the first time, Madison looked him in the eye. You brought a camera? He said, his voice low, quiet. Madison blinked. What? You trying to make this a story? Get some views for your guilt? No, I swear. I just want to talk. And listen. Another pause. Then the door opened wider. And there he stood. No coat, no hat, just a man. Tired, but steady. Inside, the room was neat. Simple. A bed, a desk, a few books, and a box of old medals under the window. He motioned for her to sit. Madison opened her mouth to speak, but he raised a hand. I'll tell you a story, he said. One I've never told anyone. She nodded, breath caught in her throat. But you only get one question after it's done. One. Madison agreed. JR looked out the window, lost in thought. Then he began. It was 2009, Afghanistan. I lost more than just men that day. The room was still. Outside, cars passed and horns echoed. But inside, time slowed. JR Callahan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes distant. Like they were staring into a war zone no one else could see. Madison sat across from him, her fingers laced together, still unsure how she'd gotten here. From a mockery on a street corner, to a front row seat into the life of a man the world thought had disappeared. He began. Afghanistan, 2009. It was supposed to be a recon ops small team. In and out. No gunfire. No casualties. That's what they told us. His voice was calm. But Madison noticed the way his hands trembled. We found something we weren't supposed to find. A village. Empty. Deserted. But not abandoned. What do you mean? Madison asked softly. He looked at her. I mean, the people hadn't left. They were taken. And buried. Madison's breath hitched. They made it look like a Taliban hit, he continued. But it wasn't. These were trained. Clean. Silent. JR looked away. We radioed it in. Told command what we saw. Less than 6 hours later, my entire unit was gone. Madison blinked. Gone. Dead. Ambushed. No backup. No explanation. Just me left. He paused. And one file. He stood and crossed the room, kneeling beside a small safe tucked beneath the window. He opened it slowly, like it contained something more dangerous than documents. It did. Secrets. JR pulled out a weathered folder. It had no markings, no stamp, only a single piece of duct tape across the front, with the letters SB31 scribbled in faded ink. He handed it to her. What's this? Madison asked. JR hesitated. Proof of a mission that didn't exist, of an operation buried by the same people who gave me medals. Madison flipped it open. Inside were maps, photos, and a list of names. One name caught her eye. Senator Allen Westbrook. Her jaw dropped. He's running for president. JR nodded grimly. And he's built his campaign on lies. He signed off on SB 31. I have the audio, the orders, the aftermath. He sat again. But if I go public, I don't just expose him. I put everyone I know in danger, including myself. Madison sat in stunned silence. The weight of it all slammed into her like a wave. You were never just a homeless man, she whispered. JR chuckled bitterly. That's the funny part, isn't it? Sometimes, hiding in plain sight is safer than being seen. She stared at the photos again. The documents, the faces. What are you going to do with this? He looked at her, and for the first time his gaze softened. That depends. Do you still think I'm just a joke with duct-taped shoes? Madison's throat tightened. No, you're the strongest person I've ever met. Pause. Then JR stood and walked toward the window. His silhouette was cast in gold from the setting sun, like a soldier standing at the edge of two worlds. One past, one still unwritten. "I thought I was done running," he said. "But I think it's time someone heard this story." He turned to her. "Will you help me tell it?" Madison's eyes widened. "Me? You asked for a second chance. This is it." Suddenly, a loud knock at the door. 3 times. Heavy. Intentional. JR froze. The color drained from his face. He whispered, "They found me." Madison's eyes darted toward the door. "Who?" JR didn't answer. Another knock. Then silence. He nodded toward the folder in her lap. "If anything happens to me, you take that. You take it straight to this name." He scribbled it on a notepad. Colonel Elias Rourke. Retired. Northern Virginia. Madison took it, clutched it to her chest. Another knock. Then, the sound of boots outside. Slow, deliberate footsteps walking down the hallway. Then stopping again. Right outside room 212. JR stood silent. Madison's heart thundered in her chest. Then, the doorknob turned. Then stopped. Silence. JR locked eyes with Madison. No words, just a mutual, unspoken understanding. If this was the end, at least the truth was no longer buried. Another sound. A faint mechanical click. Then the door creaked open slowly. But it wasn't who they expected. No suits. No agents. No threats. Just a man. Late 60s. Veteran's hat. Cane. Sharp eyes beneath a gray brow. JR let out a breath. "Rourke." The older man nodded. "Heard you stirred the hornet's nest." JR stepped back. "I didn't call you." "I know." "She did." He looked at Madison and gave the smallest of respectful nods. "Smart move, kid." Madison held up the folder. "Figured someone should know what this is before it disappears again." Rourke took it gently. "You did good." Then his face turned grave. "But now we've got a problem." Inside the room, the three sat around a battered desk as Rourke flipped through the SB-31 files. Every page he turned added more weight to the air. "These are enough to bring Westbrook down," he said finally. "And probably a few others who've hidden behind him for years." JR leaned back. "You think anyone will believe it?" Rourke gave a hard smile. "Doesn't matter. Once it's out, they'll have to answer." Madison looked between them. "So what happens now?" JR stood. His shoulders were straighter than she'd ever seen. "I stop hiding." The next day, the headline hit like a thunderclap. Decorated veteran accuses presidential candidate of war crimes cover-up. JR's face, no longer behind duct tape and shadows, filled every screen. He gave one interview, just one. And in that interview, sitting beside him, was Madison. The world responded fast. Some praised him. Others called it a smear campaign. But no one, not one person, could ignore him anymore. The man they laughed at. The man with broken shoes had walked through war zones, through grief, through silence, and now, finally, through fear. Weeks passed. Madison returned to school a different person. Not because she'd gone viral, but because she'd seen what most people never do, the weight people carry behind their eyes. And how easy it is to judge what we don't understand. One afternoon, she returned to the same coffee shop corner. A different man sat there now, a quiet older veteran with a patch on his jacket. Madison smiled, handed him a cup of tea, and sat beside him. "I used to walk past this spot like it meant nothing," she said. The man chuckled. "Most do." She glanced at his boots, worn, dusty, cracked. And this time, she didn't laugh. If this moved you, made you think, or reminded you of someone who deserves to be seen, like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for Dark Case Files.